Cook. Welcome to part 7 of the series, Freedom Through Travel. Today we look at South Asia, and specifically we look at India and Nepal. I'd asked an ex-co-worker of mine what India would be like as he was born in India. He asked me if I had ever gone to the state fair. And I said I had. And he said, well, do you know how crowded it is at the state fair? And I said I had. And he said, well, that's kind of how the whole country of India is like. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. It's a very crowded country, but it's also a very interesting place to go to.
Just one rule, no smoking and chewing beetles. My first day in India, I am met by a tuk-tuk driver who takes me on a visit around New Delhi. The first place we stop is a temple. One of the things that I found interesting are all the swastikas that are on these temples, but the swastikas are actually a good omen in Asia. The second temple I'm taken to by my tuk-tuk driver is a Sikh temple. I go into the Sikh temple and I'm given appropriate clothes and walk around to see what the temple looks like. Upon exiting the temple, I am given a small ball of food, almost in the shape of cookie dough, which everyone is offered and I take. My driver then takes me to the central part of New Delhi, where I visit where the government offices are now. One of the places I see are the secretariats, which now houses the government ministries. I also see the Indian Gate, which is a memorial to Indian soldiers killed in World War I and the Afghan War of 1919. This tomb was built for the second Mughal emperor who ruled from 1530 to 1540, and again from 1555 until his death 1 year later. Walking down the stairs of his library in the old fort, Hanuman heard the azan and quickly sat himself down on the nearest step. Upon rising, the emperor tripped and slid down the stairs. The injuries incurred in the fall proved to be fatal. But it wasn't until 1565, 9 years later, that these tombs began to be built under the directions of his wife. Later, many other prominent Mughals were buried at this site, so there are additional tombs. This complex is quite impressive despite the fact that some buildings have fallen into decay. The construction began in 1199. The complex was built as a celebration of an ex-Turkish slave's conquest in northern India. The 72.5-meter tower was erected and stands at the eastern point of the then Muslim Empire. The next city I visit is Agra, and the first place I visit in Agra is the Baby Taj, which is a small marble tomb that was built from 1622 through 1628. The inside of the tombs are also impressive. The semi-precious stone inlay work on the white marble enhances the tomb's beauty. Next to the Baby Taj is a river where many people do their laundry and many cows lay in. It's amazing how many beggars and how many poor people there are in India. Today I am taking a bicycle tuk-tuk, and my driver is taking me to my next stop in Agra, where I see a couple other people on a bicycle. The next destination in Agra is called the China Tomb, the decayed burial chamber of Shah Jahan's chief minister. I then visit the Agra Fort, which is usually number 2 on most visitors' checklists for Agra. Construction began in 1565, and its fortifications were gradually strengthened over the years, and now 2.5 kilometers worth of fortifications lie around the fort. I visit the Hall of the Public Audience first, which is where the Shah sat on his throne. I also visit other areas within the fort, including the royal chambers and the fish palace. The red sandstone walls do house some bats. This large tub on the south side of the complex was where the queen took her rose-scented baths. Number one attraction in Agra is the Taj Mahal. Shah Jahan heard the news in 1631 that his favorite wife had died giving birth to their 14th child. Because of his grief, he decided to build a memorial for his wife, which is the Taj Mahal. It is said that the whole book of the Quran is built on the walls of the Taj Mahal. Here is a look at some of the Arabic writing. As you arrive in midday, it may look white, but by the time sun sets, it changes colors almost to a pinkish and then gray look. This is what it looks like late afternoon. The next city I visit is called Jaipur, which is called the Pink City. This is the third city in the Golden Triangle, which includes Delhi, Agra, and Jaipur. The first place I visit is the City Palace, which was built between 1729 and 1732 and encompasses 15% of the Pink City's total area. The Hall of the Private Audience, seen here, contains 2 huge silver urns built to contain incredible quantities of water. Sign notes that each urn holds 9,000 liters of water and weighs 345 kilograms. This yellow building is called the Chandra Mahal, which is where the Maharaja's residence now stands. Hawa Mahal, or the Palace of the Winds, was built in 1799. It was built as a place, as a retreat, a place where the leader, the emperor, could go to compose his songs to Krishna. This minaret, which is shown from the Hawa Mahal, is the highest structure within the walls of the Pink City. And it's also a place where some criminals would be thrown from the top of the tower to their deaths. After leaving the Hawa Mahal, I head up to the Amber Fort and pass some monkeys which are guarding the fort. The Amber Fort is the first in a series of 3 forts that overlook the Pink City on its north side. The Amber Fort was built in 1592 and is a blend of Hindu and Islamic architecture. I climbed to the top of the fort, which affords a nice look over of the city. The first thing you see here is a water reservoir that was built. After a long hot day, I take the elephant ride down to the road leading back into. I then move to the south side of the Pink City, which also has many nice attractions. The first place I visit is the Birla Mandir, which is a white temple. It has many. The temple is built by the wealthy Birla family and is truly pluralistic. There is evidence of artwork done by Muslims, as well as the pillars flanking the temple, which include carvings of Hindu deities as well as depictions of Moses, Jesus, and Socrates. To the east is the Galta, or sometimes called the Monkey Temple, with many temples built into the rocky hills. Worshippers can be seen bathing, washing, swimming, and diving from the cliffs, while monkeys scamper around the washing wells. Back to the north part of the city, I go to the Royal Gator. These are the cenotaphs of the Maharajas of Jaipur. I then visit Albert Hall, or sometimes called the Central Museum. The museum has information on culture and history, some of the musical instruments that are used, and as well as paintings and various other odds and ends. After leaving Jaipur, I moved to Pushkar, which is a small, much more relaxing city. Pushkar has nearly 500 temples, but the first one I visit is the Brahma Mandir, which is the only temple in India dedicated to the Brahma, the Hindu creator god. Holy city. Legend has it that at the beginning of time, Lord Brahma dropped a lotus flower into the desert. A holy lake sprang up where the flower fell and became a place where pilgrims could be cleansed of all their sins. This is Pushkar. The lake is now the main attraction of this calm town. Three local women taught me into putting a henna design on my hand. This henna design lasts about 2. Here's another one of the temples in Pushkar. It depicts 3 different gods, but the one I like is Hanuman, which is the flying monkey god. This brawny god is respected for his loyalty and is often shown, as in this picture, tearing open his furry chest. This is a representation of how poor the country is. This man is loading up his donkey with bricks. Along the lake are 52 ghats, which connect the lake to the temples. Tourists are usually mobbed by priests who work at the ghats. It's a bit of a scheme, I felt, but many times they give you a ceremony, which is scripture reading and flower scattering, and then continue to ask you for money. After the ceremony, called the puja, your patronage is recognized by a wristband that you are given. After you give this wristband, most of the other priests from the other ghats will leave you alone. For many Hindu, a dip in the lake completes the circuit of redemption. I then try some food on the main street, which is called Sadar Bazaar, and then head back to some of the back streets, which holds the Pushkar Fair held in late November. I then relax on a hammock at the hotel I'm staying. This particular hotel is rented on a pay-what-you-can basis. The next city I visit is called Ajmer, which is very close to Pushkar. Ajmer is much more crowded than Pushkar. The main site to see is called the Dargah, which is a series of tombs and mosques. I have a few hours to kill, so I stumble on this museum that is basically a gold-plated rendition of how the universe was created. I then take the train ride up to Rishikesh. This is where the Beatles came in 1968 when they visited India. However, they left shortly after because Ringo didn't like the food. This ceremony takes place every night at sundown on the cities along the Ganges. Rishikesh is on the Ganges, also is Hardwar, which you will see later, which is a different ceremony. Holy This is Rishikesh then. For the Himalayas. I decide to buy the bowl-shaped flowers, which are then set on fire and placed in the river. I have a couple of little kids helping me out in this, but this is representation of your soul going down the Ganges River. This footbridge separates where I'm staying in Rishikesh with the rest of the city of Rishikesh. Rishikesh has less temples than Pushkar, but there are still some that are located in the foothills. These allow for pretty impressive views over Rishikesh. The offerings given at these temples often contain food, and they are often stolen by monkeys. This is a view of Hardwar, which is the next city I visit after Rishikesh. This temple is dedicated to Mansa Devi, the form of the goddess Durga, who can make the wishes of faithful and holy people come true. As stated before, the ceremony is also in Hardwar, not just Rishikesh. Hardwar is also on the Ganges River. About 3 or 4 o'clock, people start to bathe in the Ganges, take a dip in there. But as it gets dark, music and chanting begin. It's going to be another hour yet, probably till sundown. See the stains there. Pretty good undertow, so I'm not used to coming, falling in, getting swept away. Fire is also part of the ceremony. People put their hands near the fire and then put their hands through their hair as if to cleanse. New Delhi is much different from Rishikesh or Hardwar. It's very, very busy, and it's difficult to get around at times. There's also many people trying to beg for money, and there's some people that will try to scam you. The last attraction I visit in New Delhi is called Raj Ghat. This is a burning flame on a black slab, which is a memorial to Mahatma Gandhi, who was cremated on the spot after his assassination in 1948.
I am reminded of our freedom trip tip for today, and it has to do with India specifically, and that's experiencing culture shock, because that is something I truly did. Like I said in my introduction, I had asked an ex-coworker of mine what India would be like, and I don't think any amount of reading or any National Geographic specialist can really prepare you for India. It's very hot, it's very crowded, it's dirty, you'll have a lot of beggars coming up and asking for money, there's possibility of scams, difficult to cross the street, you step in cow manure constantly, and it's something that you just cannot prepare for. I had a vision of a very peaceful place with a lot of people that imitated Gandhi walking around, but it certainly wasn't like that. And if you can handle some of these things, like these conditions, then I really suggest that you go to Mount Rushmore or try a little bit easier trip. But it's also good to go to India because of experience this culture. And this is indeed something that you can do in the U.S. It's something as simple as if you live from a country in a rural, or looking at something in the city, or vice versa. If you live in the suburbs and looking at something within the inner city, you'll have a bit of a culture shock here, but not as big as I had, as what happened to me when I hit India. Moving on to Nepal, I arrived in Kathmandu, which is a much cooler place politically and just the raw temperature. After arriving in Kathmandu, I moved south to Chitwan National Park. This is a very scenic bus trip, but it's also a bit scary, as there's not any guardrails, and buses that do go over the hills or fall off the side of the road basically are left there because there's not enough money to clean up the burnt buses. So it's kind of an ominous sign when we see burnt out buses. But we do arrive, and I stop at a village close to the reserve, and this is where you can see how really poor Nepal is. I believe as far as the gross national product, it's the poorest country in the world. And here you can see why. You can see we also went to a nearby school, and they asked for money. It was a pretty soft sell, but they didn't really need a hard sell because you could see how poor it was in this area. We did go in the reserve, and the first night we took a small tour, and our guide showed us it's kind of interesting, a plant that you touch and it kind of shrivels up as a protective device, I assume. And I noticed we also got a nice sunset that night before we did more of a safari the next day. And this was quite a bit different than my African safari, where you really couldn't get out. You weren't allowed out of the Jeep. This is one where you walked or went by boat, or you were carried around by elephant. And you're also given instructions if you see a rhino hide behind a tree, if you see a bear make noise, and if you see a tiger pray, because if it attacks you, you're going to die. But they're very unlikely that they would attack you unless they're hurt. I was a bit disappointed about the number of animals I saw. The only one I saw is a one-horned rhino, and we're on top of an elephant, so I didn't feel scared. Elephants are important here, even though the drivers look like they're treating them fairly mean. There is an effort to help these elephants and the way they're trained. Many of them from India, and at this particular place there's an elephant breeding center where the elephants start at age 2 and are trained. Back in Kathmandu, there's the Durbar Square, one of many Durbar squares. The royal family moved here, away from here about 100 years ago, but it's still important for the numbers of temples, and it's still a religious, social, and commercial center of Kathmandu. Next I went to a suburb, which is called Boda, and that was to see a very impressive stupa. It's one of the largest in the world. There's many legends of its origins, but the stupa has inspired awe and reverence since ancient times with its location between Kathmandu and Lhasa. Each segment of the stupa's structure is supposed to correspond to one of the 5 elements. The 3-leveled mandala-shaped base represents earth, the dome, water, the spire, with its 13 steps corresponding to 13 steps to nirvana, fire, the parasol, air, and the pinnacle, ether. The red-rimmed blue Buddha eyes that gaze out from each of the 4 sides of the golden spire are unique to Nepali sculptures. And the nose is actually the number 1 in Nepali script. The whitewashed stupa is splashed with stripes of rust colored with wash to resemble the lotus shape. Also, visitors are welcome. There's a set of monasteries around the actual stupa, and visitors can visit. And there's actually many monasteries, but you need to ask if you want to take a photo, and you need appropriate attire. But the monasteries do not mind you coming in, as it's a source of revenue also for them. The second Durbar Square that I saw is in Patan, which is actually, you can really consider it part of Kathmandu. It's separated by a river, but it's really the same. North of the square is a temple called the Golden Temple, and this is a gold-gilded temple that makes up a west end of a 12th century monastery. And the gods are supposed to be able to slide down the roof of this gold temple. Within the Durbar Squares, there is the royal palace. This is from the 17th century, and it's guarded by 2 stone lions, and there's also a tortoise and a sea creature that guard another central area. And this central area is open only one day, and it's a year, and it's open only to Hindus on that day. There's also another monument where the king kneels under a cobra, and as long as the bird stays on top of the cobra, the king can return. There's many other temples that also are dedicated to Shiva and Vishnu. Some date back to 1564. A nearby temple is the Temple of 1,000 Buddhas. The terracotta tiles all have sculptures of Buddhas, and after a 1934 earthquake, there's enough of these tiles that broke loose that they made a whole other temple they got dedicated to Buddha's mother. Also, returning back to Kathmandu, there's several nice areas within Kathmandu, including a bridge that looked over some waterways, and it's a bit more relaxing place. The next city I went to nearby Kathmandu is called Bhaktapur, and they also had another Durbar Square. This is much less cluttered than the other Durbar Squares I looked at, and it is more wide open. The royal palace is, again, one of the most important things to look at, and also the palace of the 55 windows. Each window was handmade and took nearly 100 days to make each window. There's several other temples that I liked, one depicting both animals and humans. And close by is the second square. There's actually 3 squares in Bhaktapur. And the second square is dominated by the 5-story pagoda built in 1702. The 5 sets of animals are the wrestlers, the elephants, the lions, the giraffes, and then the tigers and lioness. And the one above is supposed to be 10 times stronger than the one below. So they get stronger as you move up. The last square has most of the really old buildings here, the oldest set of buildings. One dates back to 1427, and these are wooden buildings, and that's where the priests used to take up residence here. And it's said that one of the buildings was actually built from the trunk of one tree. And then walked out into the country, just outside of Bar, and it's a bit interesting to see the way they cultivate their oats and their crops. These are ways that maybe my father had talked about when he was young. So these are practices in the U.S. that are quite, a few years old, but they're, I don't know if they'd be kind of considered modern, but the way they thrash the oats and whatever is a bit outdated as far as Americans would consider. And I also stopped by some schools, the schools in session, and I also noticed that they were in uniform, and most of the students didn't seem real interested in school at that point. Then returned to Kathmandu, and there's one temple that really dominates Kathmandu, and it's over 2,000 years old, and it's the holiest place for the Nuari Buddhists. There's many crooked steps to go up to see this temple, and surrounding are 9 golden shrines surrounded by Buddha images that represent earth, water, fire, air, and space. There are the legend behind the Kathmandu Valley is that there were snakes in this valley, and then a lotus grew in a lake, but it was inaccessible because of the snakes. And then the creator then cut a sword, which became this Kathmandu Valley, and then this particular stupa here that overlooks the city was built as a way of thanking the god, as you could see this lotus. So I actually enjoyed Nepal quite a bit too. It was, like I said, it was quite a cooler climate, and it was an interesting mix between India and China and Hindu and Buddhism. So that will take us through South Asia, and in part 8 we will go into Southeast Asia.